Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, the bank that puts you first. They can meet your banking and financing needs for personal, agricultural, business, commercial, mortgages, and so much more. Visit firstbank.com to learn more.
Virginia Tech football ran all over Tulane in a 41-20 win in the Military Bowl. Today, we're going to recap the game and talk about what stood out from the Hokies' first winning season since 2019, and we'll get you up to speed on basketball too. That's all coming up on episode 339 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, which starts right now. Happy New Year to all who are listening. We're recording on Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024 from our high-tech studios in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer to the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. As always, the first month of subscriptions is free. I'm David Cunningham, Tech Sideline's managing editor. Across from me is Will Stewart, our fantastic founder and general manager who recently celebrated a birthday. To my right is Chris Coleman, our lead analyst and columnist, who celebrates his birthday in less than a week. And behind the scenes producing is Nick Brown. His birthday's in February. One of our extremely talented student interns from the Vitae SMA program. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. This episode is also presented by the Hokie Way. And Will is going to bring us up to date on what's going on with their recently concluded Stone by Stone campaign.
Right. So to remind everybody, I know y'all listen to the podcast regularly, so you're up to speed on this, but just in case, the Hokie Way had a $250,000 fundraising campaign that started on November 28th and ran through December 31st, and its goal was to raise $250,000, of which that would be matched. So the potential here was $500,000 raised. The Hokie Way sent out an email yesterday. They I've been trading emails with them, and they'd been giving some updates via Twitter, but they sent out the email yesterday after the campaign was concluded, and they blew way past the $250,000 goal. They raised $427,000. So with the $250,000 match, that is $677,000 raised for Virginia Tech NIL and in support of their charitable organizations that they partner with. Now, here's what I found interesting about that. In the email, they said, and this is a classic example of two different ways of raising funds. In the email, they said that 761 donations comprised the $427,000. Now, on Tech Sideline, we had a form that you could donate through Tech Sideline, and that was tracked. And Tech Sideline wound up, let me pull this up on the phone, 513 of the 761 donations for, let's call it $110,000. It was $109,900. So TSLers through the form on Tech Sideline comprised 67% of the donors/donations, but, in air quotes, only about a quarter of the money. And that's because the Hokie Way can go directly to big donors and get big donations. And that's how, a lot of this fundraising is done. But what Tech Sideline did represents the crowdfunding support, the crowdfunding part of fundraising. And I ran the numbers yesterday. I don't remember exactly what they were, but the average donation that the Hokie Way was responsible for was something like $1,200. With the matching contribution, it's like $2,600. Whereas on Tech Sideline, the average donation was about $200. So I just think it's a really neat example of those two different ways of raising funds. So I wanted to thank everybody that donated through Tech Sideline. That was really cool. Our original goal was $75,000. I almost went for 100 when I was setting it up with them, and I'm like, nah, let's. But TSL readers came through for us, and that is awesome. $677,000. And again, that's just in 1 month, and no doubt got turbocharged by the optimism after the win in the Military Bowl.
Yeah, which we're going to talk about.
And I bet there's absolutely no coincidence at all that Virginia Tech retained all their top players and had a good portal class.
Yeah. Well,
Sometimes correlation is causation.
yeah. We'll get into some of that here in a sec. We're going to cover a bunch of stuff today between football and basketball, and we'll obviously start with the bowl game. But first, Happy New Year. It is 2024. How was your Christmas and the end of 2023? And what are you most looking forward to this year?
Christmas was good. Went back to Danville for a few days. What was your second question?
What are you most looking forward to this year?
Packing on 5 more pounds of muscle.
Yeah, I've actually lost weight. Yeah, I've lost like
somebody
10
else
pounds.
on this set needs to lose some weight.
I would say, I don't know. I'm thinking about, I would say generically say next football season, which would be accurate. But I'm thinking about changing up my annual European trip this year. Obviously going to London to watch a Tottenham game, but I actually think I might take a train across the English Channel and do some of my like World War II stuff that I've always wanted to do, like go to Bastogne and then take the train back to Normandy and all that.
Have you been to Normandy?
No.
So I'm about to show my ignorance here. You mean there's a train that goes over the English Channel?
Under
it.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
There's a tunnel.
How many miles long is that, or kilometers?
Is it the channel?
Yeah, I think that's what it's called.
The Channel, the Channel Tunnel.
Yeah.
Very clever.
Yeah, it's
now
easy.
it
The
sounds
Channel
familiar.
Tunnel. Yeah.
You can take that train and be in like Belgium within like from London in
It
like
is
2
almost
hours.
32 miles long.
Yeah.
Wow,
And it's
that's
fast.
impressive.
Very fast train.
That's longer than the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel.
No, I have taken a ferry across the English Channel before, but it's more scenic, I will say.
Yeah. All right. How was your Christmas, Will? How was your birthday?
Good. We had Christmas was good. We had all the kids in the house. All of my kids are graduated from college. In case you don't know,
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah, my youngest Annalise graduated in December from Tech. She did all right. She graduated with a 3.65 or something like that. So that's pretty good. So all of the kids are out of college. They were all home. So that was very cool. And birthdays are not a big deal at my house. We don't do anything. I just sat around and drank beer and watched football games just like the rest of you.
Not a bad way to end 2023.
Well, I got to sleep late. I slept till like 10:30. So that's what the birthday is to me. I get to sleep late.
In terms of the bowl game, Virginia Tech won 41-20 over Tulane. We're recording this almost a week later because of the new year and because the bowl game was on a Wednesday, December 27th, in Annapolis. Lots and lots of rain. I feel like Creedence Clearwater Revival wrote a song about that.
Yeah.
Overall thoughts from the game. How was your viewing experience?
Good. I watched it at PK's. It was the only bar open in downtown Blacksburg, so it was packed.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good viewing experience there. There's some TSL subscribers in there that came up and said hello. It was one of those things where it's like, okay, just like that, it's 7-0 Tulane because of a fumble, but you just kind of roll your eyes and you're like, I still think Tech's the better team and it's going to play out that way. And it did ultimately. I think Tulane's 2 touchdowns were very fortunate. Obviously Tulane had a couple fumbles too that Virginia Tech turned into touchdowns. So that kind of washes out, so to speak. In the end, Tech won by 21, and I think that's a fair reflection of that game.
Yeah, I mean, Tulane wasn't Florida State in terms of the number of opt-outs, but they'd lost their starting quarterback to opt-out, and head coach is going somewhere else.
3 assistants.
Yeah, we detailed all that in the preview, and I'm sorry I can't regurgitate how many players had opted out. I think one of their better corners had opted out, but I think, and I put this my Monday Thoughts on a Tuesday article is going to run later today, and I think first thing is 2 thoughts. Yeah, I thought Tech was going to win, but this game stayed close because of the weather and the mistakes. Tulane definitely benefited from a couple of short fields. Late in the third quarter, Tulane was on Tech's 5-yard line. It was 27-17. They were 5 yards away from making it 27-24 very late in the third quarter. So even though I felt like Tech would win, there was always that concern that something crazy would happen and they would lose. And the other thing that didn't get talked about in the postgame as far as I've seen is, Jesus Machado, the linebacker for Tulane, got hurt on the very first play of Virginia Tech's second possession. And he was out for the game. And that's a guy that led them in tackles, was, I think, second team all AAC. Good player. And we'll never know how much that hurt them. But it's possible that Machado being out, or Mikado if it's pronounced that way, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It's possible that him being out really did them some damage, and that's part of the reason Tech was able to run for 362 yards.
Well, and they lost. They were messing around with their quarterbacks. Kai Horton played most of the game. I thought that was odd, yeah.
But
Justin Ibieta played and then got injured. So the depth that they did have, some of it was eventually kind of cut a little bit.
I think they messed around with their quarterbacks because Horton had already entered the portal, right?
Yes.
So they knew he wasn't coming back next year, most likely, or maybe they were planning on having sort of a start. Let's see how both of them do in the bowl game, and then everybody can sort of reevaluate their situations. Well, now maybe Horton will decide to come back because if the other guy's hurt bad.
Yeah.
He did decide to come back, yes. So if the other guy's hurt bad, he's pretty much the guaranteed starter at Tulane now. Not that this is a Tulane podcast. Yeah. Honestly, I don't think it mattered that their quarterback was out. He's a really good passer. What good would that have done them?
That's true.
I don't think it mattered that their top wide receiver opted out. I don't think it mattered that their top cornerback opted out. As it turns out, their defensive ends that we thought were going to opt out decided to play.
Yeah.
And they're all conference caliber defensive ends, and Tech still ran over them. So I think those opt-outs did not affect things like people thought they would, simply because of the weather and the positions that those guys played.
I think the biggest opt-out was obviously the quarterback. Mm-hmm. And with him not playing, he was Tulane's best player, I think, across the board. With him not playing, I think it kind of changed some things. But you're right. So Tech fumbles on Tech's first possession. Tulane scoops it up, immediately scores. It's 7-0. Tech responds. It's 10-7 at the end of the first quarter. Tulane field goal, Tech touchdown pass. Coming out of halftime at the start of the third quarter, Tulane touchdown. It's 17-17. Yeah. Virginia Tech outscores Tulane 24-3.
Yep.
Over those final 2.5, a quarter and a half, almost 2 quarters. Were you surprised at how the game eventually shifted in Tech's favor? Or I think the weather, obviously, there were 8 fumbles in the game. Very, very sloppy for both teams. Tech had 5 fumbles, only lost 2 of them. But I think the weather kind of played into how close the game was, like Will mentioned, for almost an entire 2-3 quarters.
You could say the same thing. So they fumbled a punt that Tech turned into a touchdown, right? And then they fumbled I think it was on their own.
No, it was that was when they were driving and Feldarius Payne made the play and he broke through and forced the fumble.
Yeah, I mean their second fumble.
Oh yes,
when Mose Phillips forced it towards the end of the game.
Yeah, right. And
short field, and Tech turned that into a touchdown. Both teams turned 2 fumbles into 2 touchdowns on either returns or short fields. So that wiped each other out. So in the end, Virginia Tech won this game by 21 points. If neither team had fumbled, then they still would have won by 21 points, I think. I mean, Virginia Tech was 21 points better. How it would have played out if the game hadn't been wet, I don't know. I expect Drone still would have run all over him, and Tootin would have still run all over him. Yeah. There's nothing you can do about that if you're Tulane. I mean, when your linebacker gets hurt, and I think Tech is just in a good place. They have a lot of confidence right now, and Tulane. I just don't think the American was a very tough league.
Boston College beat SMU in the Fenway Bowl.
Exactly. And what did SMU done to Tulane?
Yeah.
Handily, pretty easily. I just don't think that's a good league this year.
You mentioned Drones and Tootin. Lethal 1-2 punch in this game. Drones had 176 yards on 20 carries. He averaged 8.8 yards per carry. Bashal Tootin had 136 yards on 18 attempts, 7.6 average. As a team, the Hokies finished with a season high 362 yards rushing, which came on the final play of the game. Tech broke the 361. That was the previous season high on 50 plays, 7.2 average. This is with an offensive line that has kind of been up and down at times. Maybe not the most consistent group, but 362 yards rushing against a rushing defense that had been pretty good all year. That's impressive.
So let me jump in here and add that, remember, Drones on the fumble that was returned for a touchdown,
He lost
Drones
18
got
yards.
tagged with an 18-yard loss. So his other 19 carries, he gained 194 yards.
He also had a 7-yard loss on a fumble later that was recovered by Tech.
Crazy.
Yeah,
Tech could have run for 400 yards.
And he was sacked right before the half.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, those are crazy numbers, and you're right. It came against a what had been a good run defense.
Tulane was top 7.
Yeah. So one of the things I wrote about in my article that'll get posted later today is Virginia Tech rushed for 362 yards, averaged 7.2 yards a carry, like you said, and the PFF run blocking grade is a 54. Tech's 9th best. That ranks 9th for the season in run blocking grades. There's a disconnect there between how PFF is grading Virginia Tech's, primarily the offensive line. The run blocking also includes wide receivers and tight ends. But there's a disconnect between PFF's grading of Virginia Tech's run blocking and the huge gaping holes that I saw all day long.
I thought they were pretty harsh. Now, I don't think they finalized their numbers until after the bowl.
Yeah, I don't mean to say that's fine.
I think those numbers that are still up there were still the immediate initial stuff. But, when I went back and watched some of the game the next day, particularly on the last couple drives of the game, Tech's offensive linemen were wearing out those guys. Especially on that last touchdown, the 12-yarder by Tootin. I mean, you saw Parker Clements and I forget who was. I think it was Schick who was at right guard. I mean, they were blocking their guys.
They were
10
7
yards
yards
downfield.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a good performance by the Tech line in this game. I don't think Tulane has much depth, and I think that's one of those games. I texted one of my friends who was on the Tech team in 1996. Remember how they just wore people out in the second half? And I said, this is seriously some 1996 stuff going on here. I mean, I thought it was very similar to the Boston College game. The further that game went, the more it went downhill as the Tulane players, just like the Boston College players, they figured out we can't stop them. So you break them like that, and then they mentally check out, and it gets worse than it could have been or would have been, right? Tech did the same thing against UVA, but UVA checked out a lot earlier than those other two teams because they're UVA.
So I ran the numbers in Virginia Tech in their first 3 games. They were one of the worst rushing teams in the country in terms of yards per game, 83, and yards per carry, which is 2.37. And that ranked 130th and 132nd out of 133 teams, 3 games into the season. In the remaining 10 games, Virginia Tech averaged, I think it was 221 yards rushing and 5-point-something yards per carry, which would have ranked, if they'd done that the whole season, number 5 and number 6 in the country, respectively. This was literally one of the best rushing attacks in the country in the last 10 games, and nobody's talking about that.
Probably because Virginia Tech had 11 yards on the ground against Purdue.
Yeah, and Baishal Tootin had 8 carries for 4 yards in that game.
Yep.
That's why I say you go back and play that game over. That Tech could not run the ball until the Marshall game, and then they quit running it against Marshall.
Right.
When they actually finally were able to run it, they quit doing it during the middle of the game. So it was extremely frustrating. And that's why I've kept saying I would love to go back and play a couple games early. Like, I give Rutgers full credit for having a good defense and a strong running game, so I'm not throwing that one in there. But Tech is better than Purdue. Tech is better than Marshall. This was more like an 8-4 team this year. That's why
9-4. They went 7-6. This was a 9-4
That's
team.
why I have high hopes for this team going into next year.
Yeah. So let's drill down into the Rutgers thing a little bit, and it's relevant because Tech has to play them at home next year. Did you watch their bowl game?
Oh, they won yet another game where their quarterback didn't throw for 100 yards.
Kyle Monungai, that running back.
Against Miami.
And he's coming back.
Mm-hmm. This is a physical team that can really run the football that's coming into Lane Stadium next year. Do not sleep on that matchup.
Don't think, oh my gosh, I remember going to that Rutgers game in 1998.
Yeah.
They stink.
59-7.
Right.
Monungai had 163 yards on the ground on 25 carries, averaged 6.3 yards.
So they threw for
6.5,
and they threw for 80.
Gavin Wimsatt had 84 yards.
I think he had 36 against Tech, and Tech lost.
Yeah.
Right. So no, some of that's Virginia Tech. A lot
40,
of that's
46.
Virginia Tech. Right. 46. Excuse me.
Oh, that's different.
Well, that's a big difference.
I'm just
Yeah, I know.
yeah. But I think you go back and look. It's interesting to look at the pure numbers, because obviously the numbers say that after that game, Virginia Tech was great running the ball, with the exception of the Louisville game, which Tech only had 68 yards on the ground. Now, that was a very good Louisville team. But I also think the commitment to the run was different. If you remember the Pitt game, Virginia Tech ran the ball 59 times against Pitt. This was the week after Tech played Marshall. Tech ran the ball 30 times in the first half against Pitt. That's the total number of carries in that entire game against Marshall. Now Chris talks about the scheme change and everything. And I think Tech kind of turned a corner and found some confidence and had to change it up. You're 1-3, backed up against the wall, kind of do or die. And this was a program that people were calling for Tyler Bowen. People were saying, yeah, I mean, we sat on this podcast and said, what in the world's going on? Because it wasn't like Tech was just playing poorly. It was Tech seemed set up poorly.
Yeah.
The game plan, when you're averaging over 6 yards per carry, you don't keep running the ball. You pass it.
Tech had 199 yards rushing against. You're talking about Marshall, right?
Tech had 184 yards against Marshall on 30 carries. That's over 6 yards per carry.
Yeah.
But stop running the ball.
committed to it.
9 for 88.
Yeah.
I mean, that first drive was run, score a touchdown, and then let's stop.
To that point, Virginia Tech, I don't believe had more than 30, did not have a play rushing of 30 or more yards, and had like Kyron Jones on Tech's first drive scores a running play of over 30 yards. I think the biggest thing is as the season went on, Tech got more comfortable running the ball more. That doesn't necessarily mean that the offensive line was a whole lot better. I think it steadily improved and steadily got more comfortable. That unit got better. But if you look at what Tech averaged, I look at like that Syracuse game. Tech had 318 yards on the ground on, 53 carries. But it was like Tech knew that was its identity. You talk about the 96 team and kind of running it down people's throats, making it tough, physical. We're going to run the ball and you have to stop it. It was like eventually, as the season wore on, Kyron Jones, Bashal Tutin, that combination, and even Malachi Thomas at some point, that just became Tech's identity. And yes, Tech has some really good wide receivers that are coming back next year that didn't probably get as many reps, as many passes as they probably should have. But I think as the season wore on, you saw Tech, Tech was more balanced offensively. Tech threw it more when it should have. I mean, obviously, Kyron Jones had a couple passing touchdowns in the bowl game, but Tech also ran for its most yards of the entire season.
I think you're dead on about the commitment to the run. It's almost like, I'll be honest, I was at my lowest point ever as a Virginia Tech fan after the Marshall game. I just thought there was no way this was going to work, this offense, the offense that was existing at the time. And what was so disappointing is because I thought the entire time they were capable of playing a lot better. That's why I was disappointed.
Yes.
And clearly they were capable of playing a lot better. So clearly I had a right to be disappointed. It's almost like Brent Bry went in the staff meeting the day after the Marshall game and said, we need to retool things, guys. We need to come up with something different here. We got to figure out who we are, and we've got to come up with a different way of doing things. And ever since they made that reset, it's been great. It's been really good offensive football, I think. I think Drones is a great fit for what they're trying to do, and I think they do a really good job with him, using him in the running game. I think there are times where Tech powered it down teams' throats, like you saw, and other times it's been smoke and mirrors. I still remember one of my favorite plays from the Syracuse game. It was like a 38-yard run by Drones up the middle, and Bob Schick ran 30 yards downfield and never touched anybody the entire time because the play call and the motion had just sucked all the linebackers on one side of the field. So Tech didn't have to block anybody. So if you're PFF, how do you even grade Bob Schick on that? He literally never touched nobody.
He gets a 0.
Right, exactly. So I just think everything turned around, and whatever they did after that Marshall game, wish they had done before, of course, but I'm not going to go back and nitpick it because I'm happy with where they are now. And I think it goes to show you what a fine line things are in football. But like, you're never as poorly talented as you think you are. I don't think. It's
so much stuff is going through my head while you two guys are talking. And, we've had Pry on the podcast 2 or 3 times, and I think he's always very forthcoming with his answers. And certainly we're going to try to get him on fairly soon. It depends upon these guys have worked hard. They need some time off, so we'll see how that breaks. But I'm definitely, I'm talking about the football guys.
Oh, okay.
Brian needs some time. Not these guys.
Oh, he's on vacation right now.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But I do want to ask him, and he doesn't usually lapse into coach speak, but I do want to ask him, Coach, no coach speak. Literally, what happened between the Marshall game and the Pitt game? Yeah. And tell me, how did this break down? How did it happen? I don't know if he's really been asked that.
Yeah, I think when I go back to, I think you were down in covering basketball in October of 2022, the ACC basketball kickoff. So I went into interviews that week, right? And I asked Pry, basically I asked him, how do you fix the offense? And I've used these quotes so many times in articles, and he started saying things like, we can't be so vanilla. We're not using our personnel right. We're too easy to draw a bead on offensively. He was so honest.
True. And it was all true.
And so forthcoming, and I agreed. That's what I kept writing about. I agreed with him 100%. He's the most forthcoming, honest head coach Tech has ever had when it comes to answering questions like that. So to me, going back to the middle of last season, he wanted to see something different. So where was the disconnect? Why did it take so long to see something different? Will always be the biggest question.
My answer would be, I don't think, and this is not against Grant Wells, but when he's the quarterback coming out of fall camp, he is not as athletic. He is not. Kyron, we talk about how well Kyron Johnson ran for 176 yards. Grant Wells is not doing that in a game,
right?
And I think. I think the Purdue game was by far Tech's worst game of the year because there's no way, like, you play that game now, there's no way if Tech ran the ball 22 times, Tech would only have 11 yards rushing.
Right.
The next 2 games, Kyron Drones is in, and Tech, I think, was sort of feeling things out. And I think that after the Marshall game was kind of maybe a come to Jesus moment sort of thing where Tech realized, like, I think the pieces were like sort of in place. I mean, Tech against Marshall, again, we talked like Tech ran the ball well. Tech just didn't run it enough. Against Pitt, Tech ran it plenty. And I think you slowly saw the team develop an identity. It just so happened that in those first couple games of the year, Tech was just out of it. And I think it was a combination of coaches, trying to force something here, trying to get everybody involved. At the same time, I mean, you look at the passing numbers. Those first 2 games of the year, Tech threw for over 250 yards in both games. Tech threw it 18 times. The next 2 games with drones, Tech threw it 19 times, 190, 160 yards. Drones is still figuring it out. But that Pitt game felt like the first time that everything clicked together, that Tech knew we're going to run the ball here and we're going to pass the ball here while incorporating more motion. And as the season went on, I think this is a credit to Tyler Bowen and the offensive staff and a guy like Brent Davis, who obviously had a big part in it. But everybody just, like I said, got more comfortable. And it's crazy to think that this team started 1-3.
Yeah, so couple things. Number one, sure, Grant Wells was a quarterback, but you can still incorporate eye candy and motion for misdirection, which they weren't doing.
Yes.
Number two, everybody wants to know what changed after the Marshall game. And I just got a chuckle because I was just thinking, I knew the week after that Marshall game, I never said any of this on the website or the message boards or publicly, but people were asking me, like, what's going on? And I said, listen, I know how this ends. It ends with one or both coordinators getting fired at the end of this year and Brent Pry getting fired at the end of next year. And that's the kind of things I was saying to people privately. Well, maybe Brent Pry went into the meeting room and said, if we don't change, this is going to end up with one or two coordinators getting fired at the end of this year and me getting fired at the end of next yeyear. Maybe he finally put his foot in on the ground and just said, this has to change. I don't know. We'll get a chance to ask him.
Yeah. As far as the bowl game itself, we got to. I enjoy the conversation. We'll talk more about kind of Tech going forward and the off-season momentum, which obviously you wrote about, and I'm sure you did in your Tuesday thoughts. As far as the bowl game was concerned, I think one of the biggest things that stuck out to me being there in the press box in Annapolis covering the game was the number of contributions Tech got from all over the place. Peter Moore has a 51-yard punt that Tulane fumbles. The first guy to hop on it is DeJuan Lofton. He's in the transfer portal. He's not going to be here.
Aiden Green makes a hell of a catch.
Aiden Green had a great catch. Feldarius Payne bursts through the line, forces a fumble. Antoine Powell-Ryland picks up. Mose Phillips forces a fumble that Mansour Delane picks up. The two tight ends, Harrison St. Germain had his first catch and first touchdown reception on the same drive. Benji Gosnell had his first ever touchdown reception. It was like Tech got contributions from everyone all over the place. Even Will Johnson. I don't think we were talking about it in the press box. No way that was an intended. That was the kickoff at the very end of the first half was intended to hit the Tulane player.
No, absolutely.
But Will Johnson goes and jumps on it.
Yeah.
That is a play that, it didn't end up really meaning anything, but that's a hustle play by a guy who, hasn't
really been a factor all season.
On defense at linebacker. Right. And he jumps on a ball on special teams. Like those are kind of game-changing plays in some ways.
We've actually got a picture from that game of him making a tackle, Will Johnson.
Yeah.
And it is perfect form tackle, absolute perfection. He is a guy who I would like to see given an opportunity to be in the two deep, maybe at the will spot next year. Like I personally would move Kelly Lawson to star. Will Johnson was a guy who I thought was a good football player coming in out of high school, but he hurt his shoulder twice and had 2 shoulder surgeries his first 2 years on campus. So he's been behind from a developmental standpoint. I still believe there's a good football player in there somewhere, though. But for him to improve at this point, he's going to have to get 2 deep reps. And
can he play the mic?
Oh, he can play either one, either Mike or Will.
Yeah.
So
6'2", 226.
Yeah, he could play Mike or Will. Yeah. But I would personally like Will, but whatever. But yeah, you're right. Lots of different contributors. I don't think it's hard to have a 51-yard punt in that weather, like Peter Moore did. I mean, you're lucky if you can even get the. First of all, you just want to catch the ball, right? I mean, that was hard enough in weather like that. Yeah, and I thought, just think Tech played a good game overall, and I expected them to play a good game. I thought they were going to be better than Tulane, and they played to the level I thought that they could play. I didn't see 41 points per se. I think I picked them to score 31.
I think we all were picking in the 30-something to 20-something range.
I picked them 31 to 20. So, yeah.
What stood out to you guys about the way Tech played defense?
I thought Tulane was a little bit late trying to get Mekhi Hughes heavily involved.
They were, yeah.
This is a guy who, 15 carries. This is a guy who rushed for almost 1,300 yards this year. And he's a workhorse. I mean, he had like 3 or 4 games of over 25 carries. This is a guy who can shoulder the load. What is a better opportunity to shoulder the load than in a game where it's pouring rain? He ended up with, and it's not like, Will, you're right. I mean, Tech was in control, but at the same time, this was a tie game early in the third quarter, and this was a 1-score game early in the fourth quarter. Similar, it was like it was like the Wake Forest game. It was close at those points, but yet you felt like Tech was still always in control.
Well, let me jump in real quick. I don't want you to keep going, but the way coaches think of it is there's a point at which you leave your game plan. Mm-hmm. And Tulane didn't arrive at that point till the end of the third quarter. Right. So Mekhi Hughes should have been running.
He should have been running it. And he had 15 carries for 88 yards and averaged 5.9 yards per carry. And this is a guy who routinely had over 20 carries a game during the regular season. And it's pouring rain, and you only give it to him 15 times with your starting quarterback out. What are you thinking?
So the other thing, I know we're talking about how Tech plays defensively, but I want to talk about how Tulane played defensively.
Right.
Virginia Tech's first third down, what do? They run the quarterback draw up the middle for, 10, 12, 15 yards. Yeah. And I actually went on either the message boards and Twitter, and I said, oh, QB draw. Didn't see that coming, did you, Tulane? And they got sucked in by it the whole game. It's like they weren't aware that that's what Virginia Tech was going to do.
Well, I don't even – do we even know who their defensive coordinator was?
It was one of the defensive backs coach.
Okay. All right.
But
I should back off.
but that's what happens when you have an interim defensive coordinator. I mean, interim had
who knows how much the players are paying attention to what they're saying.
I think just being there, not that Tulane didn't want it, but you could tell Virginia Tech really wanted it.
Yeah.
And I think talking to some of the seniors after the game, talking to Alan Tisdale, talking to Feldarius Payne, talking to Norrell Pollard about just what it means to go out like this, to beat UVA, to beat Tulane in the Military Bowl. What does it mean? That David Teal had this great stat. First time Virginia Tech's won its last 2 games of the season since 2015. Yeah. Frank Beamer's last year.
Wow.
Long time.
I mean, first time Tech's won a bowl game since 2016. But to go out like that, you talk about momentum, and we can get into that conversation right now. Virginia Tech, yes, has a bunch of guys that are going to be leaving. Contributors, whether Alan Tisdale, a guy who had been here since 2018, Feldarius Payne, a guy who unfortunately doesn't have more eligibility left because he had an all-ACC season and didn't get talked about enough. Norrell Pollard, I mean, there were a lot of guys that contributed that have kind of left this program on a high note.
I'm glad you brought up Feldarius Payne. I think we should give out a Feldarius Payne award every year for the most underappreciated player on the team. Yeah. That guy is one of the highest grading defensive tackles in the country on PFF. He also had, I think it was 10 tackles for loss this year. So double-digit tackles for loss. He played, I think, fewer than 300 snaps. So one of the things I'm going to do, I think, later this week, I'm going to do a little inside the numbers. I'm going to pick out all the defensive linemen who had double-digit tackles for loss this year and see how many snaps they played. I bet there's very few, if any, besides him, that did it in under 300 snaps. I think that was one of the most productive seasons of Virginia Tech defensive tackle has ever had. And
it went under the radar.
Definitely went under the radar. Of course, technically, he didn't start.
Yeah, and wow, just totally lost my train of thought. I love just what I was going to say is I loved his quote about the play he made where he forced the fumble. He just said words to the effect of, oh, I'm just looking at him and I'm thinking I can probably shoot this gap and somebody needs to make a play and why not me?
Yeah,
I think he's going to have a chance to go to the NFL. You could put 5 or 10 pounds on him and try to play him
as rushing defensive tackle.
It's like a 3 tech, or maybe you could play him as a bigger defensive end on an odd fronts. I mean, you've got some options there, but he's too productive to at least not get a look. To at least not go on a roster in the preseason, somebody give him a chance.
Yeah, he's got the want to. I never got a chance to talk to him. He actually lived right next to my daughter over on Warren Street, and I did meet his family. Enjoyed meeting his family, and it's funny. I was thinking about. I saw a picture the other day of Justice Reed. Do you remember him?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
No, of course, Justice was cursed by playing during the COVID year, I think, so Tech fans never really got to see him. And I was thinking of the contrast between Justice Reed, how he didn't make much of an impact, and Feldarius Payne did. And I'm actually wrong about Reed. If you go look him up, he had 6.5 sacks.
I think he had 2 sacks on the first drive of the NC State game, first game of the year.
I know, like the very first play.
And you're like, whoa,
yeah.
Good transfer, good portal addition. Yeah.
And, so he had a solid year. It wasn't like he was invisible. But, I'll be interesting to see your analysis, Chris, because you can argue that Payne probably should have played more. But, what the heck, all's well that ends well.
I think it's interesting. Virginia Tech, we'll talk about this in a second. In terms of portal additions, we talk about how this staff has kind of checked the boxes when going after portal guys. Obviously, Antoine Powell-Ryland had a great season, and when you're playing alongside Antoine Powell-Ryland, he's probably going to get most of the credit. But Valdarius Payne was a transfer portal guy last year that had to sit out a year. The only reason why he was able to play this year was because, unfortunately, he had an Achilles injury that forced him to get a medical hardship and come back this year. He chose to come back this year. He didn't have to. He comes back and he has a fantastic year. And
it's really good that kind of effort wasn't wasted last year in a 3-8 season.
That's true.
Yeah, but it like that's something where if he doesn't get injured, he plays last year and he's not here this year.
Okay, and that's a great point. So I don't know if I've ever written about this before, but so Tech's 2004 team that won the ACC featured a couple of redshirt senior defensive players that would not have been on the team that year were it not for injuries earlier in their career. All right, so Eric Green, the cornerback, remember he played and started as a true freshman. And so he would have been done in 2003. But like before, I think the 2002 season, he tore his ACL and had to sit out that year and took a red shirt instead. So he was still on the team for 2004.
I know who the other one is.
Jim Davis?
Jim Davis.
Ripped his pec playing golf.
Playing golf.
Yeah.
God, that sounds painful.
That sounds horrible. But so he had to sit out a season in redshirt. And again, he was playing a lot in 2000. Remember, he had back-to-back sacks against Clemson in the bowl game. So those are injuries at the time. You're like, oh man, that's unfortunate. But then they turned out to be blessings in disguise long term, because I don't know that Tech wins the ACC that year without either one of those guys.
Well, that sounds really painful, Jim. But did you hit the fairway?
It's crazy that you remembered that.
Yeah,
that back-to-back sacks in a Clemson
I don't
game.
remember what I did yesterday.
Jim Davis also made, when they were playing at UNC that year, UNC was driving for what would have been the tying or winning score, and Jim Davis made a big sack on 3rd or 4th down to seal that game. And he, like you said, he would not have been there except he played golf one day earlier in his career.
And he batted down at least one of those passes on Miami's last drive.
Yep.
So, yeah, wouldn't have been there
Everything
if he didn't
happens
get
for
hurt.
a reason, I
That's
guess.
Right.
Last thing, before we get into the bigger picture, last thing on the bowl game. Disgusting weather. Luckily, Andy and I were in the press box, sitting next to each other. I made this comment the other day. That was the first time during a game in a press box where there have been times where it's hard to see the field out of the press box. This time it was hard to see out of the press box window. The rain was like on the window. It's like I'm like looking out, trying to see through raindrops on the window. Very weird. From your guys' perspective, watching on television, what was the crowd like? Because the place was pretty full, and I think in comparison to the 2018 game that was somewhat similar weather, the Virginia Tech fans stuck around, probably because Tech was winning.
Yeah, I thought it came across on television really, really good.
It wasn't mic'd particularly well.
Yeah, it wasn't mic'd very well, but you could look. I could see the pictures on Twitter, and from what I could see on TV, that it looked like a great Tech crowd, and it was. And I think it, I think the location, obviously. I know people in Northern Virginia that I'm friends with that haven't been to a game in Blacksburg in years, but they went to this game.
Oh yeah, and that's the cool thing about playing in that game. And the announcers repeatedly said it was like a Tech home game. But as far as the rain goes, I thought the shot they showed that really showed it was they put the camera on the stadium lights, and the rain was pouring off of the lights. It was hitting the lights and then pouring off of the lights. And Nick and his dad went, and Nick said that he said first half it wasn't too bad. He said second half it was miserable. It was pouring.
When you get to the point where like some of your cameras, like the cameras, they needed to wipe the lenses off, but they weren't doing it. So from some angles, you couldn't even see the game.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Again, I'm sitting up in the press box. I didn't really have that perspective from television, but yeah, I'm that's why I asked, because I know there are a lot of people at home that decided not to go, maybe because of the weather. Shout out to Josh Barr, the guy, the communications director of the Military Bowl. He was kind enough to give Andy, Damien Sordelet, David Teal, and I a ride in his car back to our cars. We left the press box at like 9 o'clock, and standing water in the parking lot and just pouring rain. And it was still coming down like it was in the second half.
Nick told a story about he and his dad were sitting in the front row of the upper deck. They had to move back one seat because there was 3 inches of standing water where they were otherwise sitting. You know, he said I looked down and the water was running over my boots. So my dad and I moved up one row.
At least it wasn't like cold. Like the 2018 Military Bowl was like 35 degrees or something, and horrible. At least it was actually for December war.
And the 98 Music City Bowl, I think, was 40 degrees and raining, really cold.
Yeah. As always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. As our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us bring you all of the great content across all of our platforms. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Bank with First Bank and Trust Company. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. We can talk about some big picture. We also can talk about some comings and goings. There's been some movement lately on the roster the day after the bowl game, and Brent Pry said this the day before the bowl game on Tech Talk Live. He said Virginia Tech was going to pick up a commitment the day after the bowl game. Oklahoma defensive tackle, former Highland Springs standout Kelvin Gilliam. Oklahoma transfer, third defensive tackle for Virginia Tech this offseason, joining Aeneas Peebles from Duke and Kamari Copeland, formerly of Virginia Beach by way of Iowa Western Community College and West Point. What stands out to you about Gilliam, and how good do you feel about that trio replacing the very experienced trio of Pollard, Payne, and Kendricks?
That was kind of, I think that trio is probably as good as you could probably expect Tech to do, and they're the 3 guys that make sense. I think Gilliam comes in, and he and Fuga, he's a little bigger, so he and Fuga probably play the same role, whereas Copeland and Aeneas Peebles probably play the other role. I think things should be fine. I don't know that. Back to Feldarius Payne, he was so good this year. Like, I think Peebles will be as good or better than Pollard. I think Pollard was good this year too, but I think Peebles is better. But I don't know that Tech will have anybody that's as good as Payne. But I also think Tech, huge upgrade at Mike, so that'll help offset if their defensive tackles maybe aren't quite as good. I don't know. But anyway, all 3 of those pickups were the pickups that make sense, both from a talent and experience standpoint and scheme fit. For the case of Peebles, like, he's proven against ACC teams, he's a great scheme fit, and then there were connections. Gilliam, there's a Highland Springs connection. He's got the size you're looking. You recruit a couple of smaller, twitchier defensive tackles, and now you want to maybe get somebody with a little more size to complement
6'3", 295.
Yeah, exactly. And and then Copeland is he's got such a great work ethic. I actually watched a 20-minute long workout type video where he's giving advice. He wakes up in the morning and shows you what he eats for breakfast, and actually films himself cooking it.
Yeah, he's got a YouTube channel.
Yeah. It's he really works hard to turn himself into the player he is, and he's a great scheme fit. And so I just think Virginia Tech did really well at that position in the offseason.
The little bit about Gilliam. I don't remember Feldarius Payne's stats coming from. He came from Nebraska, right?
He was a defensive end at Nebraska.
Oh, okay.
So he never had more than like 3.5 sacks in a season, I don't think.
Not a particularly impactful guy at Nebraska, so it was a pleasant surprise that he was very impactful here. Looking at Gilliam's stats at Oklahoma, in 2021 and 2022, he played in 13 games and had a total of 7 tackles. With half a tackle for loss, no sacks. In 2023, he played in 6 games and had 3 tackles. And then his bio says that he missed 6 games due to injury.
Yeah, it's not like he didn't play at Oklahoma. Like, he had, I forget how the snaps broke down, but he was a fringe part of the rotation in 2022. Yeah. So he played, I want to say, 70 to 100 snaps that year.
Yeah.
And then he was kind of being used in the same role this year until he got hurt after like the first 4 games of the season. He came back towards the end and like played in their last 2. So it's not like he sat there and was rotting on the bench.
Okay.
Right? He was a guy who was fringe rotation guy for an Oklahoma team that, quite frankly, brings in a ton of good players, right?
Yeah,
so there's a lot. I think there's a line of thinking that, like, oh, he never played at Oklahoma. That's not true. He didn't play a lot, but he's also, like, you've got to be good to get on the field at Oklahoma, I would think.
Yeah, and so hopefully Virginia Tech will get out of him what they got out of Payne, a guy who didn't particularly stand out at his previous stop, but can step in and really rack up.
They're
some
different
stats.
style defensive tackles, but if you can get the same level of production, it'd be great. Yeah.
No surprise. Another transfer portal out. Jack Hollifield, center, didn't play much at Virginia Tech. Played a little bit in some later stages of the games. Obviously, special teams. Chris, you mentioned it when maybe Andy mentioned it. One of you guys mentioned it when you wrote up that was one of many things going on the day after the bowl game, in terms of who Virginia Tech is going to have as backup centers. I think this is kind of an interesting conversation. Johnny Dixon was one of the guys that he like in pregame, he would rep at center behind Caden Moore along with Jack Hollifield. He's gone too. So it's like you got Caden Moore. Who are the other centers?
Who are the other centers? We have no idea at this point. There was a walk-on who got a couple of snaps during the bowl game, and that's it. I think you have to – I think it's tough to rely on portal offensive linemen because there's just not that many large dudes who can move their feet. So they're at a premium. Like even average portal linemen are going to get a ton of offers because nobody's got good offensive line depth. I'm telling you, nobody does. Yeah. What Tech had under Vance Weiss there for a couple of years was not normal in college football. So I think some centers are large men who can move their feet and snap the ball. So they're even more at a premium.
And, oh, by the way, if you watched Alabama's game last night, their center was struggling.
And that's a team that's in the college football playoff.
Right. So Tech's going to have to manufacture a backup center here, most likely. So who's that going to be? I don't know. I think Braylon Moore is built like a center, more like a center than an offensive guard. I would be inclined to move Braylon Moore to center. And you have a rotation there with two brothers, and then Caden's done after this year, and then Braylon takes over. And then you can start a bigger guy at offensive guard. And I think that gives Tech more size, more depth, and everything on the offensive line. But we'll see how they approach it in the spring. That could be a good question for Brent Pry.
On the offensive line, do you expect Tech to add more still? I know you said you do, like in terms of trusting portal guys. There's such a hot commodity.
There's one guy from Florida, and I forget his name.
Yeah. You keep talking. I know.
Yeah.
I know
He and Drones went to Baylor together.
They went to Baylor.
Mezcua.
But he's a very good player. He started at left guard for Baylor. He started at right guard for Florida. He's a big guy, 6'5", 337. So I want Tech to get bigger up front. They don't have the biggest offensive line this year. I would bring him in, and he would walk in and start.
Did you see? So he on the 30th, he tweeted he was in the portal. Did you see who the first person
Drones
reply was? It was Kyron Drones with three eye emojis.
And if you look even before he entered the portal, he was retweeting Kyron Drones highlights from the Military Bowl. Now, their offensive linemen are at a premium, but a bunch of Tech staff members have started following this guy on Twitter.
And all he needs to do is...
if I'm Brent Pry, as soon as that dude's in the portal, I'd be like, Drones, call him right now.
Have you seen this email from the Hokie Way that came just the other day?
Exactly. I think he's a guy who would walk right into the starting lineup. And I think you'd have the luxury then of moving someone like Braylon Moore to center, where I think Braylon Moore is a good player. I just think he's probably more physically suited for center.
Yeah.
And I think you could get a good rotation going on there with him and his brother this year. And then when his brother's finished, then Braylon
And you can do that because Montavious Cunningham's coming in.
He's coming in at right guard. Right. I think will play right guard. Yeah.
Did you check out this kid's grades?
No. Oh yes,
PFF grades. Yeah,
I thought you were asking
graded out overall offensively.
Class.
He graded out at a 69 flat this year. He had a 69.1 pass block, 68.9 run block. Now again, that's in the SEC, and that would be the best of all. I believe the best of all Virginia Tech offensive line.
Yeah, I don't think anybody.
Last year at Baylor. And that was in 730 snaps. Last year at Baylor in 759, he had a 74.4 overall. He had a worse pass blocking, 66.9, but a better run block, 76.9. So
I bet he could grade out close to 75 in the ACC.
Yeah.
And I'm not sold on that Florida coaching staff either, which I think is why he's probably leaving.
Well,
I wondered that was the question.
So I think he would come to Virginia Tech and, like Antoine Powell-Ryland, play a little bit better than he played at Florida.
yeah. The other recent announcement, Nick Gallo, tight end. He announced he's coming back on January 1st. Nice Happy New Year addition for the Hokies. He did not play this year. He had a knee injury in a preseason scrimmage that required surgery that forced him to miss the whole year. Got a medical hardship. Good to see him back. He was a team captain. Super genuine, great guy. He's obviously been the Gallo family has been around Virginia Tech because Eric played. That's probably been like 10 years.
I think 2017 was his last year.
Wow.
So, yeah, and
So the Gallos have
and
been
Nick
around
Gallo,
VT football for a decade.
Nick Gallo was 2019 kid, so it's like all but like 2 years in the last decade. That tight end room, I think there were some maybe some questions going into that game on just first time Harrison St. Germain was playing. Before the game, Andy and I were talking. Zeke Wimbush was in a walking boot. He did not play, so most of the reps went to Benji Gosnell and Harrison St. Germain. Gosnell had played pretty well for most of the season. St. Germain hadn't really gotten an opportunity. Daquan Wright obviously played a lot of the snaps and entered the transfer portal. But you've got those two guys who each caught a touchdown pass. First time since 2019 against Miami that Virginia Tech had two different tight ends score a touchdown. Back then it was Dalton Keene and James Mitchell. To bring Nick Gallo and add him to the room, like Tech's pretty set there.
Yeah, I doubt there's too many programs in the country that they could say they have three tight ends who've scored a touchdown in a college game.
Yeah.
And Tech will have that next year.
And if Daquan Wright had Daquan Wright stuck around, that would have been four.
Well, no, he's never scored a touchdown.
Oh, that's right.
True.
Yeah.
He's never scored a touchdown. But Tech's depth at tight end is good. I remember Bowen last year when he was the tight ends coach, 2022. He was on the podium, and I don't remember if I asked the question about the tight ends or not, but he said he thought Tech signed the best class of tight ends in the country in the 2022 recruiting class.
Gosnell and St. Germain.
Or 2023, whatever recruiting class. Gosnell, St. Germain, and Daquan Wright were all in the same class.
Wow.
Which is very impressive when you think about it. And that's slight hyperbole, but I think that's real quality in a three-man class. You keep two of those three, you're always going to have attrition. If you sign three tight ends in one class, somebody's leaving at some point.
Do that at every position.
for whatever reason. But I think I've always thought, but those guys were redshirt freshmen this year, so it was tough on them to play as many snaps as they had to play. I'm high on both guys. I'm especially high on Gosnell. You got to remember, like, he wasn't very strong this year in the run game, but he didn't get to lift weights the last 2 years because he was recuperating two torn ACLs. He tore his ACL 2 years in a row. He just needs a year, 2 or 3 consecutively in the weight room to build up his strength, and he's going to be a really, really good player. I like St. Germain, too. I think he's a solid prospect. I'm also excited for him to score a touchdown, I'm assuming, in front of his family because he's from Northern Virginia. I assume they were all at the game up there.
St. Germain.
Yeah.
So going into the season before Gallo got hurt, was he perceived as the blocking tight end? I know he can catch, but he was perceived as the better blocker, and Daquan Wright was really more.
I'll be honest. Well, yes, but by default, though, honestly, none of them could block in 2022.
Okay. So they didn't do it.
I mean, not to beat that dead horse again, but Tech was so easy to key on defensively that it was impossible for the players to block, really. But when defenders know what's coming, but I don't want to beat that dead horse again. Yeah. But yes, he's a. I
mean,
he should be more reliable there. Now that I think the offense is true, they have an identity, and it's not as easy for defenders to key in on plays and things like that.
So here's a stat: Virginia Tech's offensive line PFF graded out Virginia Tech's run blocking, not overall blocking, but run blocking graded out at 107 in the country. And they ended up with the number 22 rushing attack in the country. Mm-hmm. So if the offensive line I think that's what holds them back when they play a Florida State or a Clemson or a Louisville, that when it gets right down to you got to have some of the better units on the field, that's when I think they start to struggle. So if the offensive line and tight ends can progress as pure blockers, in addition to the offensive scheme they have right now in the skill players, it's going to be a nice jump.
I think it was. I don't know if either of you guys watched the Michigan-Alabama game, but I thought that was kind of bully ball, watching that. But yes, it is crazy to think about how much success Virginia Tech was able to have. We spent a lot of the time talking about the run, and the offensive line is still not quite there yet.
I think what Michigan has done is impressive to me. I was watching some of that game yesterday, and yeah, they had the players on the offensive line to match Alabama. But I was also very impressed with their scheming and how they made Alabama linebackers conflicted. Like Michigan's first touchdown, they ran a double slant over that middle with a slot receiver and the running back. And that Alabama linebacker didn't know which one to go with because he didn't know which if the safety was going to help
wound
on
up
which
not
one.
Going with either one of them.
He just kind of stood there and was going to cover the inside receiver or the slot receiver. As it turns out, nobody covered the running back. They created a conflict with their motion and their play design and things like that. And so they have it from an X's and O's standpoint, a smoke and mirrors standpoint, and from a talent standpoint up front.
The play that stood out to me most in that game, outside of the fantastic catch where the receiver went up in the air off a tip, it was a tip pass, and he adjusted his body and was able to catch it. Probably wouldn't have been a pick had he not caught it. This was Michigan game-winning, or the drive that sent it to overtime on a 4th and 1, 4th and 2. Michigan sent basically adjusted and moved guys around, motioned guys around, and then put the running back Corum, who's a Virginia guy. I know.
Also, unofficially silent commit to Virginia Tech one time was my understanding. He took 5 straight visits to Virginia Tech and loved it, but then his
Michigan
high
came
school
calling.
His high school coaches put him and some of his teammates in a van and took him on a grand tour of all the big schools in the Big Ten. Yep.
He's playing national championship.
Mike Sainristil, still former Virginia
Also, Mike Sainristil is a great player for them. Alex Orji's getting playing time. Cam Good is even on their roster.
But Corum got out in the flat. This is a 4th and 2. If Michigan doesn't convert this, Michigan is down a touchdown.
I think they lose, yeah.
And the way they motion guys around, they manipulated the matchup, and they got Blake Corum on a 4th and 2 out in space in the flat, wide open. He got 30 yards.
Yeah, they seem to go to that every time they needed it. Chris was talking about the touchdown they got that way, and that was a key 4th and 2.
Yeah, and that's, I'm sure Tyler Bowen's sitting there taking notes.
I'm sure he is. I thought after the Marshall game, I thought the Tech coaching staff had a great year. I thought what they did offensively to fix things after that, we'll be talking about that 10, 20 years from now, right? I just thought that was a really good piece of in-season coaching. Now, if you want to be Michigan, you've got to get a little more horsepower up front, because I think they've got the X's and O's and things like that. They just so yeah. We talk about transfer portal offensive lineman. That was one dude.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not that you would ever do this. Promise money to transfer portal guys. No coach would ever do that. Clearly, I wouldn't do it if I was a coach. But if it was within the rules. I'm checking my books.
Maybe they'll make that a feature.
They ended up with what, going $300,000 above their goals.
They wound up with $177,000 more than they.
So as far as I'm concerned, that's $177,000 to
offensive
tag. Not budgeted.
I'll tell you what. Maybe they'll make NIL. A thing in the new NCAA football video game that's supposed to come out.
They won't do that.
Would be probably crazy. Yeah. Anyway, let's transition to basketball before we wrap this thing up. Will,
I need to take a break.
Oh, we can take a break real quick.
So you're gonna have to do some post editing.
Yeah. All right. Let's take a break. We'll go to break real quick so Will can recharge real quick before we hit basketball. So we'll be right back. Welcome back. Appreciate you staying with us. Let's talk basketball briefly before we wrap this thing up. The Virginia Tech men lost 86-63 at Wake Forest on Saturday. That is a very good Wake Forest team that I don't think is getting enough credit right now. I was there in Winston-Salem. Third worst ACC loss under Mike Young. It is in terms of 20-point losses, it's the fifth time a Mike Young-led Virginia Tech team has lost by 20-plus points to an ACC team. The first two were in Mike Young's first season in 2019-20, and those were to Duke and UVA, respectively. This is third. Chris, about the way Tech is playing, about that game specifically. I mean, this was Tech getting back into ACC play after starting off with a victory over Louisville in early December. Tech goes down to Wake Forest on the road, loses ACC opener. I found this stat interesting. Virginia Tech, in its first ACC game on the road, 4 straight losses under Mike Young. Tech kind of just struggles to out of the gate in ACC play on the road. Your thoughts from watching the game and just the way Tech's playing right now?
I agree with you on Wake. I think their starting five is as good as any in the ACC that I've seen. I think Reed makes them a really good player or a really good team. Like, I think they could legitimately win the ACC as far as the regular season. That would not surprise me. That said, it's concerning when all of Tech's losses kind of look the same. So there's a certain type of team that give them trouble. I think the Hokies are incomplete relative to what they have been in the past. I think I've always thought Sean Padula doesn't really play with himself or the system at times. I've always thought he kind of pushed things a little bit too much, but I'm not sure he has a choice this year. I'm trying to remember these numbers. So last year he didn't lead the team in assists last year.
Justin Mutz.
Padula was at 130 to Mutz's 152. This year, despite missing basically 2.5 games due to injury, his 44 assists leads the team. The second closest is Rex Steiner, who has 30, and 11 of those came in one game when Padula was out. There is nobody else on this team that can pass the ball. Mm-hmm. There's no Justin Mutz was a special player. Justin Mutz was almost like a false nine.
Yeah, in soccer.
In soccer, exactly. Very, very much like that. And even when you threw it down to Kevi Aluma and even to a lesser extent Basili, those guys were good passers out of the post. Tech does not have good passing out of the post now. And I think that, and when you've only got one other effective guard, like Couture's, he's always the same player. He's a good player. But you're getting nothing, no production out of another guard spot, basically. And then you can't pass it out of the posts. There's no creativity on this team. And by that, I don't mean somebody who can just break their man down with a dribble. I mean somebody who can find a guy with a pass. And I think that forces more onto Padula's shoulder. And the longer that happens, the more games he will have like Saturday. And he's playing injured.
He's playing hurt.
He's playing hurt.
Mike Young said he's not 100% and he's still trying to get back.
I just think it's not I don't know. You're still trying to figure some things out. I would like to see Barron go back to the starting lineup because I think he's your best passer out of the 4. And now that he's making some 3-pointers, I think you can put him back in there.
And he screens well.
Yeah.
The offense moves well when he's on the floor.
Right. So I think when you've got Rex Steiner and Barron on the court together, that's your 2 best passers.
Rex Steiner?
Padula.
Yeah.
And
Barron.
And Barron on the court together, that's your 2 best passers. And I think they need to be on the court together as much as possible to maximize ball movement. Because, I don't think Tech did not play great defensively against Wake, obviously. But again, how many second chance points were there? At one point, it was 17-0 in second chance points, right? Not that I expect Tech to get many second chance points, but the margin of defeat in some of these games is...
Wake Forest finished with 18. Tech finished with 0.
Wow. Right? And yeah, so the margin of defeat in some of these games is very close to actually the margin of defeat in second chance points, if you look at some of it. Half-court Tech's defense is improved. But I think I'm actually more disappointed offensively than I am defensively right now. So I want to get the best passers on the court as possible because Mike Young's offense depends on ball movement. And right now, there's no ball movement. I mean, there's not as much ball movement. And there's not as much movement on the perimeter. You see Lynn Kidd catch the ball, and you see 4 guys just kind of standing there. And that's not a staple of Mike Young's offenses. So there's something missing here. I feel like they need to get their best passers on the court. There are some things about this team that can't be changed in the middle of the season.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you're going to magically have a third guard just figure it out and start scoring in double figures and things like that. But
unless the ball is moving.
Unless the ball is moving, that's the only chance.
I think Tyler Nickel can sort of unlock that if
the ball is moving.
That's what I mean. I thought being there in Winston-Salem, I remember going down in November over Thanksgiving, going down to Disney in Orlando and watching Tech. And I went into that tournament going, okay, Tech's probably going to be able to score. Can Tech defend? Tech defended pretty well against Boise State. Tech came from behind and had to learn how to defend. Mm-hmm. Tech defended very well against Iowa State. A lot of the stuff against Auburn and Florida Atlantic were runouts, where Tech turned the ball over and gave the other team easy opportunities. If you look at this game against Wake Forest, 23 points off turnovers for Wake Forest. The thing that this Virginia Tech offense is 83rd in adjusted offensive efficiency, 58th in adjusted defensive efficiency. This is a much better
good numbers.
Defensive team.
This is like the total opposite of what you normally see under a Mike Young.
Last year, I'll read you last year's numbers. 31 offensively, 139th defensively. Mm-hmm. So much better defensively, worse offensively. And I think it all goes back to Padula, and the ball has to move. The thing that surprised me the most in this game was how Tech seemed out of it at times. Wake Forest does not necessarily press all game, every game, but Wake full court press Tech for the majority of the game. I can understand, usually like if you get pressed, it takes you a couple possessions for you to get used to it. You might even go into like the under 16 media timeout, change some things. Usually you come back out and you're better against it. We're late. It's late in the first half, and Tech is struggling to inbound the ball.
They don't look like a confident team.
No.
They're not playing like a confident team. And I can understand that, like, because I'm not a confident fan right now. Now, I also think that there are certain matchups that are going to be better for them than the one they faced this past Saturday. I haven't done my research on Florida State yet. I know Florida State's not good.
Yeah, their record's poor.
They lost to Lipscomb.
But I assume they still have that size, though, right? So you're going to have to do something.
Average, yes. Ken Palm has an average height. Florida State ranks first.
Really?
Imagine that. Right.
Typical Florida State.
Typical Florida State. So my point being, next Saturday, that game's Saturday, right? Yeah, yes. Next Saturday. You're not necessarily going to be able to throw it to Lynn Kidd and have him make 70% of his shots in the paint because Florida State's so massive. That ball's got to move, and people have to move on the perimeter and get open shots on the outside. And they got to be shot
ready when it gets to them.
Right, exactly. So Florida State, so that playing Florida State might force Tech into that.
Yeah.
If you want to start winning again. So I'm actually glad Tech's playing Florida State right now. Number one, they aren't very good, but I think the way Tech needs to play offensively, they're going to have to play against Florida State. You're going to have to focus on that this week because just dumping it down to Kidd, it's not necessarily the answer against a bunch of 7'3" guys.
So Florida State has one guy below 6'5". On the entire roster. I'm like when you the average height is 6'6" on Florida State. Yes, Florida State ranks 72nd in adjusted defensive efficiency, but 154th offensively.
Right.
And this team just lost to Lipscomb. Yeah, watching the game at Wake Forest, the media setup is kind of like Tech. You're behind the basket a little bit. There was one play where when we talk about confidence, some an effort kind of thing. There was one play where shot goes up and Sean Padula is standing there. And he didn't even really jump up to grab the rebound. Wake Forest guy kind of just didn't even have to push him or anything. Just jumped up, grabbed the rebound, put it back up. Easy basket. And
I remember that play.
And Padula's just still standing there. And I think, yes, Padula's hurt, but there are some just effort things. Tech stepped out of bounds a couple times, like trying to bring the ball up the floor. Tech had 19 turnovers, 12 of them came in the first half. That is unlike a Mike Young team. This team has to pass the ball well and not turn it over. Mm-hmm. And if the team is turning the ball over a lot, this team is not going to win very many games.
I know the easy answer, and people on the message boards are going with this, is athleticism and things like that. But like, when there's no movement, you're going to turn the ball over. There's not enough movement on that offense this year. That has nothing to do with athleticism. Like, the team that won the ACC wasn't the most athletically gifted team either.
And it wasn't a deep team.
Right. But they moved the ball exceptionally well.
Yeah.
Like Mutz was a good athlete, but not like an elite athlete. But he was really skilled with the ball and could pass it from anywhere on the court. So that they don't have that right now. The most likely passer out of the four is Robbie Barron. And that's why I think he needs to get back in the starting lineup and needs to be on the court with Padula as much as possible. I think this team, can still win games. I mean, It's the team that exists right now isn't necessarily the team that's going to exist, in March when the season ends. But at the same time, you don't want to dig yourself into a hole early. In the end, it's a road loss to Wake Forest, who's a good team. In my opinion,
it's a quadrant one loss.
Correct. It's not a big deal. It's more about what Virginia Tech looks like as a whole, and I think I see them struggling in some areas that have been strengths for them in the past, and I see them not making up for that in other areas. Like, you're not going to have the exact same strength every year. So okay, you don't have Mutz passing out of the 4. You don't have Aluma passing out of the 5 anymore. So what's your strength going to be? Right now, Tech hasn't found one. They've got to find one.
Yeah, and I wonder, and I know a lot of fans are wondering this too, is Mike Young has offensive and defensive systems that, from reading GC Hokie 34 on our basketball board, his systems aren't predicated on athleticism. They're predicated on players being in the right place at the right time, playing the mental part of the game. When your roster is turning over by 2, 3, 4, and 5 guys year after year after year, guys aren't spending time in the system. So the hope for this year is that as Barron and Nickel and those guys get more used to the system, that the team gets better within the context of this year. That's the hope for the season.
Mm-hmm. And the problem overall, though, is those guys are 1-year transfer guys. As soon as they learn it, they're
Barron
gone.
and Long are, yes. Nickel is a sophomore.
Nichols
which is
sophomore.
good.
That's good. That's a good transfer.
But I was having this conversation in Winston-Salem after the game. I think Grant Bazilli not returning was a bigger loss than people anticipated.
Absolutely.
Because he would have been a second-year guy in the system. And instead, not that Barron and Long are not capable players, because I don't think they are the biggest reasons why Tech is not succeeding.
Right.
But like, that was an all ACC caliber player you lost.
Yeah, and it's not about any of the individual players.
Yeah.
Like, people complain about Sean Padula. Sean Padula played a big role on an ACC title winning team.
Yeah.
He's played in the NCAA tournament. Robbie Barron's played in the NCAA tournament, right? I mean, these guys have played on winning basketball teams before. They've won before. It's not about any individual, I don't think, for the most part. I do think there's a talent issue with one of the guard spots that they have that can't get addressed right now. For the most part, this is about how the pieces fit together, not about the pieces themselves.
How they work together.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think my biggest takeaway was from that game was how easy Tech was to defend at times. And it goes back to a lot of ball movement. Steve Forbes is a fantastic coach. I think he's got a really good team. And he was talking after the game about he's coached against Mike Young since they were in the SoCon together in 2016. And he was describing what you can and cannot do against Mike Young's teams. He said, you cannot go under a single screen. You have to fight through every single screen, because if you go under, then you have to help, and then somebody's open, and then you're chasing, and then the ball moves around. Virginia Tech has to have the ball move, and the ball did not move. And I thought GC Hokie 34, who obviously has pretty good knowledge of the game.
He's coached in college.
He made a good point about the focal point in the offense should be more of the backcourt instead of the front court, because getting Lynn Kidd the ball is important, but if you focus too much on him, everybody else is just standing around and watching. And I think there were too many times in that game where Tech was trying to force the ball down low, and you're not, when Wake Forest is keying in so much on the three, on the outside game. Virginia Tech did not make a single three in the first half and only took 5. To me, it's not the making, it's the only taking 5 of them. Because that shows you how few opportunities. I mean, this is a team that will shoot if it has the opportunity. It didn't get opportunities. It was 5 of 11 in the second half. So, I mean, and I asked Mike Young after the game, and he gave me a very truthful response. I asked him about the second half. I was like, you guys went toe-to-toe with him. It was a 42-39 game. And he said essentially, but it doesn't matter. When you get your butt handed to you in the first half, it does not matter what you do in the second half. But looking at the second half, there are some positive things to take away. But Tech allowed a 10-0 run at the end of the first half. So again, Tech's had a week off. We're recording this on Tuesday. Tech does not play until Saturday at Florida State. Some time to relax, recharge. That is a good opportunity to kind of get back on the right track.
I remember when Tech first joined the ACC, it always seemed like, I think they played him even in a non-conference game when they were still in their last year in the Big East. Whenever they played Florida State, it was like my birthday. Or the game closest to my birthday. And
well, it is the game close to your
all
birthday.
the time.
You got a bag of poop.
So I've got right. So my birthday is next Monday. So the Florida State game is the closest one to my birthday. So yeah, hopefully it's a different present this year.
Well, my birthday was Saturday. It was going on while they were playing at Wake Forest.
Yeah, they were back-to-back years where it was in 2005 and 2006. It was on January 8th and January 7th.
Yeah.
And Tech lost both games.
Lost both of them.
Really quickly, just want to touch on the women. They looked really good on Sunday. I was obviously there. They're up to 13th in the country. They beat Pitt by 50, 91-41.
That's a record for ACC
Sunday.
Margin, right?
It is. It was the first time ever Virginia Tech had 6 players score in double figures in an ACC game. Tech is at Wake Forest on Thursday in its second ACC game. Big one. I mean, this is like maybe one of the biggest ACC games. This is the biggest ACC game to date. On Sunday, Virginia Tech hosts number 3 NC State.
Yeah, that's a big one. And, obviously Pitt's a bad team, but still 50 points is 50 points. And so
to win an ACC game by 50 points, that's nothing to sneeze turn your head about.
Exactly. Yeah. So we talk about, the men's team, the pieces have to gel together. I think Kenny Brooks' team, maybe you're starting to see that gelling process happen a little bit earlier than you're seeing it from the men's team. Obviously, there's a higher talent level there as well. I mean, there's a lot of really good players on that team. But I also think, it's not like they've only lost 2 games. And they were both against really, really good teams. But the thing is, I think they're capable of playing better than they played against LSU if the gelling process had
absolutely
started a little bit earlier. So I think we're just starting to see how well this team can play.
Yeah, and if you look at the net, the ACC is a very good conference. So most of the games from here will be quadrant 1 or quadrant 2 or the occasional quadrant 3 games. There's maybe one or two quadrant 4 games on the list. I think the other quadrant 4 game, last time I checked, was Wake Forest. So then from there, it'll be quadrant 1, 2, 3 games.
And the big thing is, whenever you do get a quadrant 4 game, win by 50 because that really helps your efficiency rankings.
Right.
Yeah. This is a team that is kind of clicking on all cylinders right now. I was very impressed. Tech did not have a good second quarter, and then shot 71% in the second half.
Yeah,
so it's
when you get up 22-5 at the
end of the first quarter,
I think you know how the game's going to go at that point.
Yeah,
it's normal to take a little bit of a mental nap when you win the first quarter 22-5.
Yeah. Well, it's funny talking to Georgia Amor and Olivia Simiao after the game. They both said that they just mentally, defensively, they were paying too much attention to the scout. And Kenny Brooks has talked about this before. When he has a really good team, they can't give him so much detail because they will literally read into the scout and do exactly what the scout says. Like they'll come, like Georgia was like, yeah, we'll come off a ball screen and defend it and then go, okay, what's next?
Right.
And they're thinking more than actually playing basketball.
Sure.
And eventually they ended up winning the second quarter 12-11, and then they scored 57 points in the second half.
That's a good problem to have when your players listen to your coaches too much.
To your scout.
Will, the thing I want to talk to you about is Virginia Tech had over 6,000 people at that game on Sunday.
Yeah, how about that?
That's a New Year's Eve matinee.
Against Pitt. It's not like it's NC State or
Louisville, yeah.
Or Louisville, yeah. That's I did not go. I watched it on streaming and was blown away when they scanned around. I was like, wow, that place is full. And I actually had that thought for a moment, are the women going to turn out more fans this year than the men? And I'm not talking about reported attendance. I'm talking about butts in the seats.
Yeah, because there have been a couple men's games where the crowds were reported as really good, but they were actually not. Yeah. Well, yeah, but at the same time, I think the fan base is happy right now. Discarding, the men's team isn't great right now, but you come off a bowl win like that, you do well in the portal. You're setting NIL records, or our own personal NIL records, I guess.
It's Sunday afternoon. Christmas is over, so you don't need to do any Christmas shopping.
Exactly. So I think all the vibes are good right now, and the better the vibes are, the better the crowds are going to be.
Yeah.
I wrote this. I put this in my article. I don't know, Will, if you had a chance to read it. I think you'll find this very interesting because you have a long history of covering this women's basketball program. Virginia Tech right now is on pace for 73,000 fans in Castle for the entire regular season. The record is 78,000, set in 98-99. Tech is averaging, it's right now through 7 games, Tech is averaging 4,900 fans a game. That is second most behind the 98-99 season.
Which do the NCAA tournament home games count towards that attendance level? So
essentially Tech would, if Tech, assuming hosts an NCAA tournament game, Tech would break the record for most fans in a season if it stays on pace in that first NCAA tournament game.
Yeah, and so tell me what the big difference between 98-99 and today's situation is. 98-99, it was free. They weren't charging for women's basketball.
No kidding. I did not know that.
Now, they had to charge for the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
It wasn't very expensive. I think it was $10 a game or something like that. And they did turn out an average of 10,000 fans a game in the 2 games that weekend. But yeah, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but no, they were free back then.
Interesting.
I think Jim Weaver started charging shortly after that.
Free and not as many entertainment options there was no streaming. Things like that. So now you have to pay, and there's more entertainment options, and they're still turning out at that level.
Yeah, it's but that's what going to a Final Four gets you. It gets you a devoted following.
Yeah, and Kenny Brooks and Georgia Amore talked about that after the game, which I thought was pretty cool. Anthony Romano, WDBJ, asked them kind of what 2023 meant to them and what it was like, and they kind of just said historic, but also what we did last year has kind of propelled us. And Georgia Amore said, if we did not go to a Final Four and win an AC championship last year, these fans would not be here in abundance.
There wouldn't be this many here.
I mean, they're absolutely right. I'll also point out that they have a likable, popular head coach and 2 likable, popular players, and that helps as well. Not that the other players aren't likable and popular, but obviously the 2 main ones, people really like them as people. They're very popular. They win. It's like the perfect storm for attendance.
Yeah, that combination of Liz Kitley and Georgia Amore, it's 2 of the greatest players in Tech history, and they're playing on the same team.
And then you throw in Kayla King.
Yeah, and I'm thinking to teams of the past, and Virginia Tech women's basketball generally has had one really good player. Mm-hmm. The 98-99 team was they did it by committee. That was a really good team, and they had some good players. But this team has 2 great players on it, generational type players.
It's like having Michael Vick and Corey Moore on the same team.
Exactly, that's what it's like.
Terry Williams,
and Amy
Wetzel. I mean, both averaged in double figures that season. The last thing I wanted to talk about with that specifically, I was impressed by just the way the ball moves, and I think Tech is starting to figure out how to play together. And Kenny Brooks mentioned, and I thought it was really interesting. I asked him a follow-up. When you, in this era, when you have so many new faces each season, and you have like 3 returners like Tech does, it takes time to figure out how to play together. And what stood out to me about what Kenny Brooks said was you can see it in practice. Georgia Amore has realized, and Brooks as the coach has realized what everybody's comfortable with. What set can I run that will get this player open to get a good look? Georgia Amore knows where to get this player the ball because that's where they like it and that's where they're most comfortable. And that's something you don't just walk into the gym on October 1st when you practice and you learn. It takes a couple months to play games and learn.
Well, the point that has to be made is, sure, they brought back Kitley Amore and Kayla King, but that's all they brought back. Yeah. Everybody else is new. Carly Winslow redshirted, but that's 8, 9 new players that are trying to figure out how to play with these 3 established
Yeah, it's
players.
not like you're breaking in 2 new transfers. It's basically a whole new roster.
Oh, yeah. And this is a team that is rolling right now. I think people are kind of undervaluing them, which is very funny. Last thing before we go, just want to shout out, there's a huge wrestling match tonight. Virginia Tech, number 11, at number 2, Missouri. Jack Brizendine will have extensive coverage of that. Is a 6:30 p.m. Eastern match unfortunately,
on Flow. Yeah.
Flow Wrestling. What's coming up on Tech Sideline? I know Andy Bitter, who is on vacation, that's why he's not here. He has a special story coming, which we previewed before. I believe we're going to run it tomorrow morning. His Corey Moore interview. What else is coming up on Tech Sideline? I know I'm going to write some basketball stuff here soon.
Will's got Tuesday thoughts coming later. I'm going to do an Inside the Numbers probably tomorrow. I want to talk about Feldarius Payne, and I want to talk about some of those Sean Padula assist numbers compared to last year, and basically talk about what I just talked about. I shouldn't give away free stuff on the podcast. This is a disservice to our subscribers. But next week, since the transfer portal is closing, today was the last day.
Today's the last day you can enter it.
Right, and I think the portal officially closes on the 4th or something like that or whatever. So next week I'll do a couple articles on here's what the roster looks like on each side of the ball as we head into the spring. So questions like who's going to play backup center or do we need another player at this position, things like that. So that's what I'll do next week once all the portal stuff for this window becomes finalized.
Sounds good. Will, anything else from you?
Well, it's the new year, and we all have our resolutions. So, we basically just show up and plug and chug during football season. So the new year is always when I start thinking about what do I want Tech Sideline to be? What do we want to do this year that's different? So once my article's posted today, I'll probably disappear for a while, and I'll be working on my deployments and flanking maneuvers. As Al Swearingen once said, that's one of my favorite Al Swearingen quotes. So that's where I'll be.
Sounds good. Well, I will be at Wake Forest on Sunday or on Thursday for the women. I'm not going to Tallahassee, but I will be. Yeah, with a top 15 women's game on Sunday, I'm going to be here.
Yeah.
Big clash for the women. They're playing really well right now. I think the men have a good chance to get back on the right track, and I'm very excited to. I will not be paying for it, but I'm very excited to keep up with Jack's coverage. I mean, this is a big one for Tech Wrestling. So obviously that a lot of not a lot of portal stuff going on right now because the portal is closing, but hopefully we'll have Brent Pry on here soon, and maybe there will be some off-season interviews and stuff. But there's a lot of momentum right now.
I think so too. I think it's one of those things where, I wish next football season would hurry up and start, but at the same time, I think this is going to be a very productive offseason.
Not me, man. I'm willing to just hang back and enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I want to ask you, actually, Chris, before we go. You wrote about how good Brent Pry is in the offseason. Yeah. Brent Pry's undefeated, in your words, against the offseason. You go 7-6 this year. And now you got the offseason to worry about. What are your expectations?
I thought he did an amazing job last offseason coming off a 3-8 season. The portal class he signed, his relations with the fans, high school recruiting turned out to be good, even coming off a 3-8 season. So I think there'll be even better reception for him. When they were up at the bowl game, he had all the local coaches in at practice. And that's an important region for Virginia Tech, the DMV area. He just understands and grasps things like that.
One would say pride.
Gets it. Whatever it is. Yeah, he gets it. So when they go back and do that road tour this offseason with the fans, like in Richmond, or when they do their coaching clinics, he's going to get even better reception, I think, this year.
Especially if he carries around the
Commonwealth Cup.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he didn't go into last offseason with a ton of ammunition, yet he did really well. And some of that was still the new car smell, but he got more ammunition this year. And that's a dangerous proposition. The offseason is going to be good for Tech fans through the years, and hopefully the actual seasons can catch up. It started to this year.
Yeah, this thing he's doing with doing a better job recruiting the state and bringing players who grew up in the state back in out of the portal, that's going to really build. We've said that before. That's a thing that's going to just create more and more momentum.
Well, that's a great note to end on. And I was going to say Andy. Andy's not here. Will, Chris, thank you guys. As always, Nick Brown, thank you. Behind the scenes, appreciate it. Happy late birthday to you. Happy early birthday to you. I'm sure we'll talk next week, talk about more basketball. Giovanni Heater should be back soon. So thank you all for listening. I know we ran a little bit long, but we had a lot to talk about. It's a new year. Tech Sideline still here, still the same. Go check out our website, techsideline.com. That's our bread and butter. That's all of our editorial content. So for Chris Coleman, for Will Stewart, and Nick Brown, I'm David Cunningham. This has been episode 339 of the Tech Sideline Podcast. Have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the new year.